you take, the more you have to look after the country instead of after a particular set of individuals.
Yeah, it's very nicely put, and as ever with international comparisons, you do realise that we're a funny little place. Finland outperforms us on every educational metric with a well-funded state education system and very, very, very few private schools. I think there's only one in Sweden. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's mostly for the children of diplomats, and the idea of having private schools is a little bit ridiculous. I don't agree with your premise, just for balance. If you simply say private school is an unfair advantage, it's a slippery slope. Next, you'll be saying that anyone who earns more than average has an unfair advantage, and we tax everyone to equity. Fact is, the state system won't cope with the influx of new students, and all pupils will be worse off with bigger class sizes, etc. All the money raised from the VAT will go into the state system. And I'll tell you now that when you get some sharp-elbowed middle-class parents who've just been squeezed out of being able to afford private school, turning up in their local state schools, everything will improve. I mean, it just will. You'll have more fundraising. You'll have better PTAs. You'll have... I don't like this. It's not an ideal scenario, but it is exactly what would happen. And it's not a slippery slope any more than having an NHS that's free at the point of care is a slippery slope. And of course, you pay more into that according to how much you earn. So, listen, everyone is going to come at this from a personal perspective. And that's why I think my own personal perspective upsets some people, because it's so honest. It's so brutally honest. It's grossly unfair. But if I can afford it, I'm having it. What I won't tolerate is people claiming that somehow people who can't afford to feed their children deserve contempt and scepticism, and people who are worried that they might not be able to afford increased school fees deserve sympathy and a warm hug. I'm making a list of all the things that you can say to them about getting on your bike, getting a better job, cancel your Netflix subscription, maybe have fewer tattoos, stop having avocado and toast for your tea. And of course, ultimately, if you can't afford school fees and you don't want your children to go into the state school system, then don't have children if you can't afford them. 11:32 is the time. Lottie Morley has your headlines. It is 11:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where in a way, it's politics distilled, isn't it? Are unfair advantages good or bad for society? The answer is they're bad for society, but they're good for the people who get them. So, inheritance tax is a weird one. We may talk about that next, but it's possibly too similar to this. I saw some research yesterday that showed even when it's made clear to people that they are never going to have to pay inheritance tax, they still have a particular problem with it as a levy. I don't know why. And then you hear people saying it's a tax on aspiration. It's nothing of the sort. I mean, logically, you'd much rather pay tax when you're dead than when you're alive. But of course, if you're a parent, you like the idea of passing on money to your children for very much the same reasons that you like the idea of paying to give your children a head start in life. And it's not just about the education, as I keep saying. I mean, that's why private education is an unhelpful phrase. Because, the difference between going to Eton in terms of the social cachet that it gives you, the doors that it opens, the handshakes that you learn, the old school tie, the power of the old school tie, the difference between going to Eton or even my old school, which is far from in its heyday these days, but it was when I was there, a place called Ampleforth, sort of like the Catholic equivalent, some people sometimes say, which isn't really true, but it has a cachet that you're not going to get by going to your local fee-paying day school. So there's all sorts of things that you're paying for, some of it measurable, some of it not. But of course it's unfair. And yet reducing access to it for more people also feels unfair. It's funny. 11:37 is the time. Francesca is in Barnet. Francesca, what would you like to say?
Good morning to you, James. I have to say that I find that the 20% increase on the school fees of the VAT is terrible. It's really difficult for middle class parents like myself who have good jobs but
Yes.
perhaps not quite good enough to already afford them with the cost of living crisis, with the mortgage rates going up. It's basically pricing people who typically went to these schools out. And I went to one of these schools from the age of 5 all the way up to 18. My parents were working class, and they, managed to get the money together to send me and my sister to a private school. Fast forward all these years, I've managed to have a great education thanks to them, university, and a very good career. And my husband and I would struggle to
But
send
this is the point where I say, with my tongue in cheek, I don't want to hector you, but then this is the point where I say, as a right-wing radio presenter, that, well, sadly, your career's just not good enough, is it? So you're going to have to get a better job if you can't afford the school fees. Because I've heard people say that about parents who can't feed their children. So there's absolutely no problem saying it to people who are just worried they may not be able to afford private education. Have you thought about getting fewer tattoos, Francesca?
I don't have any tattoos.
Okay. What about cancelling the Netflix subscription?
Well, we've thought of everything. And I think, the thing that people would struggle to believe is that, I'm a solicitor in the city. I earn, a very good salary compared to some. It's unbelievable for some people to think that, it would be difficult for us. I mean, yes, we can do it, but it would just be increasingly difficult. An extra 20%, is actually a lot of money.
But you're not hearing anything that I'm saying. It is. I mean, if I just simply apply the rhetoric of not being able to afford things that most people would consider to be essentials, and the country that we live in, the ecosystem that we inhabit, those people are routinely told that it's their fault they can't afford things. So the idea that I'm supposed to muster up reserves of sympathy for people worried that they may not be able to afford to continue to privately educate their children, you must see on one level how ridiculous that is.
I do see how ridiculous it is. I definitely take your point on board. But what I think you're missing is that, it's very different. You're talking about two very different things. Do I agree that we should tell people who can't
We're talking about an epic unfair privilege versus the most basic of essentials.
Yeah, you see, I disagree with you when you say that it's a privilege and that people get ahead in life. And the reason why I say that is because I look at the job that I'm in, and I look at some of my colleagues that I work with, and they haven't had the private education.
93% of them.
Well, but
93% of them went to state school, did they?
I don't know the percentage. I'll be honest with you.
I do. But it's nowhere near 93%. Let's just look at High Court judges. You're a lawyer, so you'll know what percentage of them went to state school. Is it just a coincidence, or the state or the private schools just somehow magically attract the most gifted future lawyers?
But I think that to go to a good private school where people are becoming High Court judges who are extremely bright people.
No, they're no brighter than the people at your local comprehensive school.
But you have to take, but some of these, James, like some of these schools, you have to take entrance exams to get in. So if you're not
and some of them you don't.
You can't go.
Yes, exactly. but there's people at the local state school who would get in. But their parents can't even dream of paying the fees. This is the bit of the conversation that I find most surreal. If it doesn't bestow an unfair advantage, why are you paying for it?
For all the other things that come with it, the amazing facilities that they have at these schools, the sports grounds that they've got, the music. If your child, let's say, isn't particularly academic, then they might find something they can do in the future that's not based on academia. That's an unfair advantage to the kid over the road who's not particularly academic, who's not going to the school. Listen, I'm in the same boat as you, although I'm in exactly the same boat as you. But this determination to deny that it's unfair just fascinates me. Of course it's unfair. But that's just the way the whole system is built, isn't it?
Yes, it's an unfair system. But why are you so keen to deny that it's an unfair advantage? Why do you need? Because I'm comfortable saying it's unfair.
Because I don't see it. I mean, in my line of work that I do, I don't see it as an unfair advantage. If I had it right in front of me, then I would say, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't agree with private schools.
I don't understand what you're saying now.
Why not?
If you had it right in front of you, you'd say it was unfair, but in your line of work, you don't think it is.
I don't think it's because not everybody around me also went to a private school,
no,
and yet they're doing
for it not to be back to the numbers again, for it not to be an unfair advantage in your high-flying city job, you would need to have 93% of your colleagues state educated for it not to have bestowed an unfair advantage on the privately educated contingent.
But I think it's also a choice that every parent makes, isn't it?
It's not a choice that every parent makes. It's a choice that every parent who can afford it makes.
That's true. I take your point there. That is true. But why do you have to penalise us even more if we want to make that choice for our children?
Because it entrenches an unfairness at the heart of our society. And it's not. Why is it penalising you? It's a great privilege. If you have to pay more, it becomes an even more rarefied constituency that you're a member of.
I think it's important for a lot of people to correct the assumption that a lot of children that go to these schools have, millionaire parents.
No one said that on this show. No one has even suggested that on this show. In fact, I spoke about my own father who couldn't afford it, really, but somehow managed to cobble the cash together. So I'm afraid that cliche doesn't wash here either, Francesca.
They did this morning on Nick Ferrari's show.
I'm not responsible for what happens on Nick Ferrari's show.
But I'm just saying that I'm just making the point that not everybody, if some people think that an extra 20% isn't actually going to have a big effect.
Of course it is. Of course it is going to have a big effect. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. But it is. We're coming round in circles, and the biggest circle of all is your reluctant stroke refusal to admit that it's an unfair advantage, even as you pay significant sums of money to secure it for your children.
I just think it's a choice as opposed to an unfair advantage, but we can agree to disagree.
No, we can't, I'm afraid, because it isn't. That's a bit like saying that's an apple and you say it's a pear and then we agree to disagree. It's a bloody apple, Francesca. It's an unfair advantage. Otherwise, you simply wouldn't be paying for it. You are paying to give your children something that is denied to children, 90% of children in this country. You just are.
You give it to your children as well.
Absolutely, and I'm telling you it's an unfair advantage. Why have you got a problem admitting it?
But if you feel that way, though, why do you do it?
Because I don't want your children to have a monopoly on that advantage. I want mine to be in the game as well, just like my dad wanted me to be in the game. I'd rather the advantage didn't exist.
But you can't change that unless we live in a communist society.
Oh, really? So every country where there's no private education is a communist society, is it?
No, I don't mean it like that. Sorry.
How do you mean it then?
I just think that the other countries that have amazing state schools, which you're absolutely right to have pointed out earlier, I think that their whole taxation system and the way that they deal with things is very different.
No, it's not.
I don't agree with...
Finland just abolished it. Right. Finland just abolished it cold. Just took a decision one day, we're not going to have private schools anymore.
But I think unless the government actually takes a bigger decision...
Well, that's what the government is doing when it's a Labour government. It's introducing the 20%, which reduces the amount of people enjoying this massively unfair advantage. And the lower that number gets, the better society and the fairer society becomes.
And where are all the children that, come out of private school to go into state school? Where are they going to go when there are no places for them?
There are loads of places. Schools in central London are closing. Primary schools have got a huge shortage of new children starting, to the point that many schools are closing. And you won't find anyone in the United Kingdom that can't find a place in a school for their child. So you don't need to worry on their account.
I do think that there are lots, especially in the area that I am. I'm speaking of secondary schools that genuinely don't have extra places, and children don't have places to go.
Okay, well, if we end up in a mythical future where children are roaming the streets unable to attend school, then that would be the responsibility of government. But it's not an argument for continuing the perpetuation of a hugely unfair advantage that we secure for our children by dint of being wealthy. In fact, if you want a fair society, it should be the children of the poorest parents that go to the very, very best schools, and then the future would become more equal for everybody. I'm not sure I can help you any more than I have already, but I'll tell you one thing for nothing. It's an apple. It is 10 minutes to 12. I guess it's a question of deserving, isn't it? You kind of have to kid yourself that you deserve something. It's about being born 3-0 up and thinking you've scored a hat-trick, or being born on third base for our American listeners, and indeed viewers on YouTube. You're born on third base and you think you've scored a triple. I don't get that. I don't see why, if you're enjoying an unfair advantage, you people struggle to admit that it's an unfair advantage. But it is all tied up in the British class system. Do you think Jacob Rees-Mogg ever looks at himself in the mirror and thinks, flip it, heck, imagine if I'd gone to a bog standard comprehensive school, what the hell would I be doing now? Of course he doesn't. He thinks he's born to it. It's why a lot of them trumpet their Christian credentials, in quotes, because they believe that God made them high and lowly, the poor man at his gate, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. But it is, it's bizarre. But listen, I still, I don't even know if it counts as hypocrisy. It's just a simple admission of unfairness. And as long as this unfairness is for sale, I will be buying it for my children. Thank you very much. 11:51 is the time. Imisalua is in Fulham. Where are you on this one?
Morning, James.
Hello.
We've had this conversation before. I went to a private school.
And you went on a scholarship. I've been doing this job so long, I can tell the listeners that you went to private school on a scholarship, Imisalua. It's incredible, isn't it?
I know. It tells you how long I've been calling.
Well, you were still at school when you first started calling me.
Oh, was I?
Yeah, you were in the sixth form.
Oh my gosh, if I tell you when I left sixth form, you're going to feel like I left in 2011.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Oh my god.
Tell me about it. How do you think I feel? You feel old. I flipping heck. Anyway, where were we?
So I went to private school. Obviously, my mum for 11 plus made sure that I was so good at 11 plus exams. Like a scholarship was essentially what we wanted because that's the kind of education that she wanted for me. Now, we didn't pay for it, but my mother wouldn't have put that much effort into making sure I had it if she didn't think there was an advantage to be gained from having it. So there's that. So I think even if you don't pay for it, if there are people who drill their children into making sure they get it because they recognise those advantages. That's number one. Number two, the lady that was the city solicitor that was speaking, it's really interesting because when you go to a school like mine, you are essentially taught that in order to send your children to a school like that, there are things you have to do. You need to get the grades. You need to go to this university. You need to go to that job. Right. So if you do all those things, if you follow the rule book, and you get to the point where you're supposed to enjoy the thing that you were working all this time for, and you can't have it, you're going to think that something has been done. Yes. You're going to think that you're being
penalised. If you, what is it that they say? If you've been privileged for your whole life, equality feels like oppression.
Exactly, yes. And that's the interesting thing,
isn't it?
That's the interesting thing. People are willing to protect this thing because, the reality is, if you are a city solicitor, and I guess I don't know, I'm not assuming, but if you also had if your partner also had a good job, the reality is you should kind of be able to afford fees.
Yeah.
But fees are expensive. Like the school I went to was significantly cheaper then. It's almost 30 now? That's for one child. If you have two, that's 60k
it's off
after
the charts.
tax.
This is after tax. So there's a generational presumption that you'll be able to repeat what your parents did for you, but actually, we should see it in the same light as property ownership. We're living through a period now where, for the first time in living memory, people are less likely to own property than their parents were, and private education is going through a similar process. I guess
it is, but also like if you go to these schools
without the 20% increase.
Pardon?
It's already going up without the 20% increase.
Exactly. Private school fees are going up, and also financial assistance is less readily available.
Yes, that's
so
true.
Whereas most schools previously had like a package, so even if you weren't, I don't know, completely low income, if you were mid income, there was a bit of money for you that you could find. A lot of that isn't available now. So you're gonna find that it's unfair. Also, the reality is, if you go to these schools, a lot of your friends go to these schools, a lot of your peers go to these schools. If you work where a lot of people go, everybody you know has gone to these schools.
But we divide the population into two types of people: people who ask new acquaintances where they went to school, and people who think that's an absolutely ridiculous question.
Yes, but you're also going to feel a bit put out and a bit weird if, you're, I don't know, sitting and having a conversation at coffee and you'll say, oh yeah, we signed our child up for this one, you signed our child up for that one. Yeah. And then you actually sit down and you think, oh wow, I actually can't. Yet I'm sitting here with all these people and I've been told that if I do all these things, I can go to this place and I can send my children, and then you can't do it.
No, you're right. And that's why there's a sense of a rug being tugged from beneath the feet. I'm not sure anybody is on what the numbers will actually be, the number of people for whom this becomes an insurmountable obstacle. I mean, we know people who found during lockdown that they could no longer afford school fees, and so the line is thin for some people. But can I make a speculation? Would you mind? Can I say that, like me, if you are in a position to buy this unfair advantage for your children when you have them, if you have them, then you will buy it?
Oh, I'm buying it.
Yeah,
that was never a question. I'm buying it.
Why? Just tell us why, if you don't mind.
Because I've benefited from it in insane ways. The education was one thing, but it was what I learned outside of the education.
Yeah.
That was another. As a I'm a black woman. I was never necessarily uncomfortable in white spaces because I'd been in them since I was 11.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just white spaces; it was elite white spaces, and I was fine. Went through uni, fine. Work, fine, because I've been doing it for so long.
Yes,
you
course.
Learn how to navigate. You learn how to package yourself. You learn how to speak. You learn how to act around certain people. So it just becomes second nature. So when you get into spaces, you're fine.
So, and why would you not want that for your children? You'd be absolutely mad not to want it for your children, even as you acknowledge, both implicitly and explicitly, just as I do, that it is an advantage that should not exist. Imisalua, thank you. Making me feel ancient now. I shouldn't have gone down that little route of when she first started ringing into the programme. 11:57 is the time. Janice is in Cottingham. Janice, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello, Janice.
My personal view is that we should abolish private education altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And if we did that, the very privileged who run the country, who suddenly their children don't have this edge over everybody else, can you imagine the change and the investment that would go into education in general?
No, it's a brilliant point. And there would still be, people would still be able to hire private tutors and you'd still have social cachet, but it would just break down these rigid divisions in our society. The less rigid they are, the better for everybody, except the people on the top of it, except the people benefiting from it.
Absolutely. And, I heard the caller earlier about the schools having the best teachers poached.
Yeah.
Of course, that wouldn't happen either. Obviously schools are going to compete, but if the investment in schools were per capita equal, they're not even where I live. Some areas get more investment per capita, child capita than others.
Yes.
But if it was all equal and there was a standard for every school to meet, and I'm just saying, can you imagine the investment that there would be in our education system, in our school buildings, if all those very few people at the top with very, very deep pockets...
Everybody went to the same school. It's John Rawls's veil of ignorance, isn't it? What would the education system look like if you had no idea where your children were going to go to school? So if you took the entire Tory front bench, blindfolded them, and said to them, right, can you just now tell us what you want the education system to look like? And they'd say, well, how rich am I? And you say, sorry, we're not telling you that. You have to create a system on the presumption that you could be one of the poorest members of society or one of the richest members of society. What would you like that education system to look like? It wouldn't look much like the one we've got.
No, and wow, what a great point. Maybe we should put that to Parliament.
John Rawls got a lot of answers to a lot of questions, actually, and probably certainly my favourite modern philosopher. Thank you, Janice. And a lot, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm glad that you found it as fascinating as I do, because obviously it's part of my identity. It's tied up in my love for my parents and my sense of my own role in society, success, if you'd allow me that word, and yet I don't really struggle at all to see it as an unfair advantage, possibly because it was drilled into me how lucky I was to be going there, how different. And, growing up in Kidderminster, it was abnormal among certainly the people we lived alongside to go to a school like that. So I got no problem seeing it as unfair, but I tried to be nice to people still struggling with that concept. 3 minutes after 12 is the time, so I didn't imagine it. I thought I might have done. Stephen Fry says his agents went ballistic after discovering that an AI-generated version of his voice was being used to narrate a history documentary. Partly, I think, because the audiobooks, the Harry Potter audiobooks that he recorded would have created a database from which almost anything would be derived. He said, I said not one word of that. This is at a conference, an AI conference a couple of weeks ago. I said not one word of that. It was a machine. Yes, it shocked me. They used my reading of the 7 volumes of the Harry Potter books, and from that data set, an AI of my voice was created, and it made that new narration. It could have read me anything from a call. It could have me read anything from a call to storm Parliament to hard porn, all without my knowledge and without my permission. And this, what you just heard, was done without my knowledge. So that is part of the story. We're doing one of our regular AI conversations in which people who know a lot more than average about this issue share with those of us who don't know more than average what the state of play currently is. Can I share that thing you just told me, or is that it's not classified? So I'm going to be available on AI speaking foreign languages soon. So you'll be able to watch the show and my mouth will move and the words that come out of my mouth in my own voice will be Spanish or Turkish, or just think of a language, and I'll be speaking it soon. And that means that you could stumble across that online and think, crikey, he speaks my native language brilliantly. I thought he just had sort of schoolboy French and a little bit of holiday Greek, and you'd be right. So that's just a small personal discovery that I made in the last 3 minutes. And then I turn to the Daily Telegraph today, where the technology editor has a story about Rishi Sunak believing there is a small window to address safety concerns before the powerful next generation of AI technology is released. Whitehall sources have briefed the Telegraph on his fear that there may only be a year to prevent it running out of control, and he is worried about it being exploited by bioterrorists. I'm going to ask you shortly what we should and should not be frightened of. The Department for Science, Innovation and Technology gave a statement to the Telegraph saying we're at a crossroads in human history, and to turn the other way would be a monumental missed opportunity for mankind. And this summit that's being called is going to look at the AI capabilities in biological or cyber attacks, loss of control risks that could emerge from advanced systems. I want to know more about this, and I've told you already I'm giving up on being the bloke who who professes pride in his own ignorance. I'll still do that on some subjects, like TikTok. No, I can't do that. I'm quite big on TikTok now. I profess pride in being ignorant about some things, but it's not very helpful to profess pride in being ignorant about this. Like the person in the office who has to get someone else to show him how to use the printer. I don't want to be that person. I don't want to sort of embrace old age in that sort of slippers and pipe fashion. I want to understand AI better. And thanks to you, I always end these conversations doing so. So another element of this story involves Satnam Sanghera, the author and Times journalist. His book Empire Land is one of the finest things I've read in the last 10 or 20 years. And it turns out that there is an AI angle to this conversation as well, because lots and lots of writers are seeing their books being, I don't even know what the correct word would be. It's like absorbed by the database, and therefore you could, write something in the style of a famous writer, and it's stolen that writer's work in order to create the database from which an entirely new piece of work will spring, but it's work built with bricks that already existed, i.e. the writer's oeuvre, the writer's canon, the writer's previous work. Corpsey's already had a look at it and found one of my books on there as well, which means that I'm kind of having my efforts robbed a bit as a consequence of the rise of AI. And then Naomi Klein, the author, the brilliant author, you'll know her from No Logo and her books about disaster capitalism and environmental catastrophe. Her new book, Doppelganger, is an absolutely incredible piece of work. I was with her yesterday. She's this week's guest on Full Disclosure. But, the story's mad. So I don't know if you're familiar with Naomi Wolf, who wrote a book called The Beauty Myth and was very progressive and liberal, and then went absolutely crackers. Shortly before COVID, she published a book that contained an epic error that was pointed out to her live on the radio. It's one of the most extraordinary moments of live radio you will ever hear. I've got a book coming out. I think I may have mentioned it. So the culmination of my book is the mini budget. It's Liz Truss's mini budget, Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, and what it did to the financial markets, what it did to the economy. It would be, imagine if I were on a live radio show and the presenter said to me something like, no, it didn't cost the economy £35 billion. It made the economy, it was a £35 billion profit that happened immediately after Liz Truss's mini budget. And I've just written 100,000 words building up to the moment that this bomb went off, and I discover live on the radio that it was never a bomb at all. So she wrote a book about people being executed for homosexuality, which is kind of pertinent to what Suella Braverman's talking about in America later today. But she'd misunderstood the phrase death recorded. So she thought that all of this 19th century documentation she found that contained the phrase death recorded meant that man had been executed, whereas in fact it meant the opposite. It meant he hadn't been executed. And a journalist and an old friend of mine, I've known him since I was 16, would you believe, called Matthew Sweet, told her this live on the radio. And it all began to unravel, and she's ended up as a full-on anti-vaxxer, and she often pops up on GBBs and sundry other weird outlets. And people get her mixed up with Naomi Klein, who wrote No Logo, and The Beauty Myth and No Logo kind of They spoke to similar spaces back in the day, going back 30 years, give or take a little. And so she found herself, Naomi Klein, online, being mistaken for a conspiracy theorist. And she's written the most extraordinary book, a large part of which looks at conspiracy theories and looks at how the space created by lies about COVID isn't going away. New things are moving into it. The crossover with the wellness, the so-called wellness industry, with the anti-vax movement. The fundamental hypocrisy of people simultaneously contending that, for example, COVID was conjured up in a laboratory with the explicit intention of infecting a population with eavesdropping technology contained within vaccines or whatever else, but at the same time also claiming that it's all a big hoax and it's no big deal really and no one needs to worry about it, so you shouldn't wear a mask. So that the absolute madness in that space. And she said to me yesterday that the world of conspiracy theories are already out of control, but with AI, with developments in artificial intelligence, God knows what could happen. And I wasn't quite sure what she meant, so I was thinking about it on the bus home, and I realised what she meant. And it's linked to the fact that you'll soon be able to see me broadcasting in Iranian. It's what you could create. So you could actually create Bill Gates looking down the barrel of a camera, telling you that the vaccines contain tiny microphones designed to track all your conversations and all your movements. And it would actually be, Bill, to all intents and purposes, it would be George Soros looking down the barrel of a camera, not a microphone, looking down the barrel of a camera, telling you that he is, or whatever anti-Semitic conspiracy theory you want to subscribe to, you can get George Soros to confirm that he's the head of it on camera. And the skills that you're going to need to know the difference and the skills that broadcasters are going to need to tell the difference are astonishing. So there's 3 or 4 little examples there. You've got Stephen Fry narrating a documentary that he has absolutely nothing to do with, but if you happen to stumble across it on television, you would not have the first notion that it wasn't him doing it. You've got me presenting this program in a multiplicity of foreign languages, coming soon to a screen near you. You've got Naomi Klein, who has spent the best part of a decade looking deeply into all of these issues, expressing profound fear about what could be on the horizon, what is on the horizon with regard to AI and bad actors in the conspiracy theory space. And there are a lot of bad actors in the conspiracy theory space, not just the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis. But you've also now got Rishi Sunak warning about it in the context of terrorism and biological or cyber attacks. And I don't know how scared I should be. And I don't apologise for asking you that question. It's actually a really important question. And we've already discovered people listening to this program who were very early adopters of AI, people who got into it very early on. And the innocuous end of it, I always remember the fella who got AI to rewrite his copy for his gym advert. Do you remember him? He was opening a gym and he wrote his own adverts, or he hired a professional copywriter. Then he got AI to do it, and the number of inquiries went up by 50% or 25%, a significant figure. Just somehow the AI pushed the buttons of the people viewing his Facebook page in a way that the words he'd written himself had failed to do. And I find that perfectly believable because, you know, you're reaching the point now where anything a human can do, a computer can do better. So how worried should we be? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The fundamental question is probably about danger. It is about this phrase, a crossroads in human history. What should we be worried about? What do you know that probably the rest of us don't know? But the next wave of AI could be much, much more powerful than today's technology, such as ChatGPT, and the next 12 months are crucial to getting ahead of the problem. So what does getting ahead of the problem look like? I wouldn't even know where to begin. But a lot of the responsibility is presumably going to lie with the platforms. You know, the platforms that put the stuff up are going to have to be a lot more responsible with regards to their publishing arm. They can't just say we're a marketplace. We're a forum where people can do what they want and post what they want. Of course, since Elon Musk bought Twitter, that their role as a safeguarder of the public good has been completely abandoned. He's set fire to that. actively encouraging idiots and conspiracy theorists to come onto the platform when previously those sort of activities would get them removed. YouTube is going to have a responsibility. But what would the responsibility be? So if it's me speaking Serbo-Croat, that's fine. But if it's me reading out the ingredients for a bomb, that's not fine. But they're both lies. I can't speak Serbo-Croat. And I didn't record the ingredients. So, whoa, what? Where do we get off? Where do we get on? How do we get ahead of it? You may have gathered from that introduction, which is coming in more or less on time, you may have gathered that you can ring in with almost anything this hour. I just want you to tell me stuff. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the question is this: what should we be aware of with regard to AI technology, stampeding AI technology, and how worried, well, first of all, how worried are you? 0345 6060 973. And from that, of course, how worried should we be? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And I also have to acknowledge the people who know even less, the people who know nothing about this. So try this on for size, okay? Just listen to this. And so what I think, the Conservative Party, right, is like a bunch of drunk sailors in a lifeboat, isn't it? They're all shouting and arguing, but none of them are actually doing anything to keep the boat afloat. And in the meantime, the people in the country, the people of this country are actually drowning. That's quite a good line, right? It's very me. This quote is in the style of James O'Brien. It's been constructed by AI in the last couple of minutes because it is both critical and humorous. He compares the Conservative Party to drunk sailors in a lifeboat, which is a metaphor for the way in which they are leading the country. He suggests that they're all fighting amongst themselves and not actually doing anything to help the people of the United Kingdom. So I love the idea that AI believes me to be both political and amusing and critical of speaking truth to power in an amusing way. I'll take that as a win. But, you know, what do you need me for? So I get that bit of it, and I'm interested in how the technology is advancing, but I also need some help in what the bio-terror threat, what the biological or cyber attacks would look like. What is it that AI is going to do in the arena of loss of control risks that could emerge from advanced systems? I just need you to explain this to me. And I'm not going to ask how confident you are. I mean, imagine if Nadine Dorries was still Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. I think this falls under science, innovation and technology, but it's probably a blurred line. A couple of phone lines free on this, so fill your boots. And if you're not in the business of ringing radio stations, but this is bang on your field, then break the habit of a lifetime and give me a call. 0345 6060 973. Neil's in Newbury. Neil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I come at it from a photographic angle,
yes.
In that as a photographer and a podcaster as well, we ran a feature recently inviting listeners to try and identify if the pictures that one of the other listeners had shared was fake or real.
Yeah.
They were all fake. And I think the most concerning thing was that a lot of the photographers couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, so that's game over for photography as a profession then.
Well, in some genres, I think more than others. I think certainly in food photography, I think that's a very worrying genre for many photographers who are seeing, you know, you don't have to spend hours laying out a perfect burger anymore. You can put in a picture from your iPhone and then create a picture using AI from it, and that worries food photographers, and I would imagine portrait photographers as well.
I mean, so this is personal to you, and I understand your worry. It's not an existential threat to civilization as we know it.
No, not at all.
and also, if I was your client, kind of probably good news rather than bad news because it's going to save me your fee.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but how far does that ball roll down the road?
Well, exactly. It's all fun and games until someone starts presenting radio shows using AI, and then everyone should sit up. Everyone should sit up and take notice at that point, Neil. That's when things get serious.
Yeah.
I hear it. And so, I mean, how close do you think you are to game over on the food photography side of things?
I'm not a food photographer, but
no, I'm in the industry.
Two food photographers. There's a lot of conversation around,
and that will just be the beginning.
This being the start of the end.
That'll go next, and you've got. I mean, start with food, but eventually landscapes. You could just program almost anything, and that I think I do file under video killed the radio star. That's the idea that technology is so amazing it's going to change everything, but actually 10 years after it's introduced, we've adapted to the new normal. The side of it that I'm particularly interested is the idea of it now running at a breakneck speed, running out of control in the next year to a degree where it will pose a genuine threat to populations in the context specifically of biological and or cyber attacks. And if anyone can explain that to us, then I'll give you the Prime Minister's number. Dario Amodi, who's the chief executive of an AI lab called Anthropic, recently warned that the technology could allow many more actors to carry out large-scale biological attacks. He described that as a medium-term risk. If you can explain that to us, I'd be very grateful. Mike's in Marlow. Mike, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
We have a board game. I've got a copy of your board game, actually, which I won off you, but that's beside the point. It's called it's all about etymology, so finding words and meanings. For me to compile a set of questions would probably take me a week.
Yes.
If I did it with AI, an hour.
Gosh.
No, really.
No, I believe you. I completely believe you. I said gosh. It wasn't an expression of scepticism, and it's all there.
It's there, yeah. Absolutely. And all you've got to do then is edit it and make sure it's okay. Just make sure it's good enough to use. But it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I mean, but again, this isn't frightening. This is just technology doing things that, how long did it used to take to, I don't know, copy a book? Before photocopiers were existed, you had to do it all by hand. So so there's that side of it that is, as you say, it sounds ridiculous, but it's not spooky. What's spooky is you ringing me up next week and telling me about how things are going in Marlow, and you not actually having anything to do with that call at all. But it sounds like you, it walks like you, quacks like you, but it's not you.
Well, you see, the thing is, it's the same. It's the same result. It's we're looking at words, meanings, finding full descriptions of a word, and this just does it so quick. I don't even have to think about it really. Yeah. So has that taken the skill out of compiling a board game? I don't know.
All right. Well, no, you still need to come up with a concept, but I could presume it's a matter of time if it's not already there, when you could just put in the details of every board game that's ever been invented and AI will come up with a new one. Or you put in all the board games that are word-based and AI would come up with a new one. We were playing Bananagrams the other day. I'd not played that before, but all you would need to invent Bananagrams is a Scrabble kit. And yet it was a game we'd never encountered. Anyone with a Scrabble kit could have come up with it, and yet it was a person that did it. Next, it will be a computer. I don't know. We may be jumping early on the bio-terrorism threat. The phone lines are full, but I don't know if anyone is qualified to comment on that. So I'll rattle through and then free up some more. Thank you, Mike. Richard's in Boncath in Pembrokeshire. Richard, what would you like to say?
Well, last evening I was watching some YouTube stuff, and
I'm on there now.
Yeah, I know.
Whole show,
I do.
Mate. Whole show.
It's one of the reasons I started listening to you, because it suggested you to me. But I follow a lot of American politics on YouTube.
Yes.
And YouTube suggested to me, and I was looking for Donald Trump having a conversation with Carrie Lake, the failed Arizona governor.
Yeah. Who another conspiracy theorist on the 2019 election, isn't she? Or the 2020?
Yeah. Oh, yes. But they're both. It was AI generated, but it was 95% convincing. I mean, you could see it wasn't. But the thing is, it's only going to get better, isn't it? In 6 months' time, you'll see the same kind of video.
So they hadn't recorded anything together?
No. It was completely AI.
What were they talking about?
They were talking about basically. It was a spoof, making themselves look stupid, talking about stealing elections, and it was just it was obviously done by someone who's very, very anti-Trump.
Yeah.
But
But it was very, very plausible, and give it a year, and it would be even more plausible, to the point of being indistinguishable from reality.
Exactly. That's what I think. Anyway, it seemed. Like I say, and it wasn't just one, because then there was another one. I can't believe that YouTube are allowing them to go.
No,
because
So it probably won't appear. But the thing is, it was so obvious. Some Republican would see it and report it to YouTube. But what happens if it gets to the stage where they make it a lot subtler? That and it's Joe Biden, and he's saying stuff about anti-Republican stuff. And then
you just have to have impersonation policies in place, like Twitter used to have before Elon Musk came along and set fire to everything. You would have to contact YouTube and say, "There's a video up purporting to be me, and it's not me." But I mean, crikey, how far around the world would it have gone before the truth gets its trousers on?
Well, exactly.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it is creeping up. So I don't know what you do. Normally, I reach for Video Killed the Radio Star when we're having conversations like this. Video games, technology, whatever it is. It's there were plenty of people who thought that we should be worrying more about blacksmiths when Henry Ford popularised the motor car, and the world turns and we accommodate it and we get used to the new normal. But this feels different. This feels like a different form of threat, doesn't it? A different form of future.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it is.
We shall see. And someone by 1 o'clock might know a little bit more about the biological and cyber risks that Rishi Sunak is reportedly worrying about. Thank you, Richard. Mind how you go. It is coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of you are excited about that conversation I had with Naomi Klein yesterday. It will be available on Friday. Although this week's full disclosure is really good. Actually, Gabby Logan, who. You talk about change and the new normal becoming accommodated really quickly, but the notion of female sports broadcasters is so common now. It's so normal now. My girls watch the World Cup, and it doesn't cross their mind that it's A, remarkable to see women's football on primetime terrestrial television, and B, it's remarkable to see a studio full of women pundits and players commenting on the game. 10 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. Men were still having kittens about the idea of a woman running the line in a football match 10 years ago. And it struck me, actually, after talking to you about something to do with the football, that Gabby Logan is a wonderful pioneer who probably doesn't get the credit she deserves for banging down some of the doors that needed to be banged down. And it's a lovely, lovely conversation. I really liked her. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. It knows me quite well, actually. But then again, I talk every day for hours. So there's going to be a hell of a lot of source material there if you want to build up an image of me in a data set and in a computer. So this is quite funny. I wouldn't have occurred to me to do this because, well, you know why. This is me on motoring matters, Keith. Imagine we're doing a show on motoring matters, which we will never do. But this is nice. There's one mistake in it. In the very first line, I wonder if you can spot it. Motoring matters, my friends. Buckle up, because we're diving into the world of cars, traffic, and all things automotive. Now, I don't know about you, but when it comes to motoring, I've got a few thoughts to share. So it's time to put on our thinking caps and dissect this fascinating subject. Let's start with the state of our roads, shall we? It's a daily frustration for many of us. The potholes, my goodness, the potholes. They're like landmines out there, waiting to destroy our tyres, our suspension and our patience. And don't even get me started on the seemingly never-ending roadworks. Got us all crawling along at a snail's pace. It's as if the whole world decided to undergo construction simultaneously. That's AI. It's me speaking. Don't get too confused, but the words were constructed by or put together by AI. Thank you to Tristan for sending that in. And the idea, of course, is that it would have access to a lot of me and therefore would know how I would sound when you give it a subject to run with. Do you know what the obvious mistake was? I'd never, ever would say my friends, because I'm only ever talking to you. I'm never talking to like 1.4 million people. I'm only ever talking to you when I'm on the radio. Just you, just those ears right there. So I'd never say my friends or folks or ladies and gentlemen or something like that. It's just the way I prefer to think of my time in the morning. But apart from that, it was pretty good. 12:36 is the time. Guy's in Stafford to almost certainly make a slightly more serious point than I just managed. Guy, what would you like to say?
Oh, well, first of all, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome. Thank you.
Very, very, very nervous, but we'll go with it.
It's only me. Take your time.
So, with regards to the kind of biosecurity aspect of AI, I do think that there are kind of some concerns that we should have.
Go on.
I think it is going to be absolutely brilliant for medicine. We're seeing it kind of used to look at images, to detect cancer, and it can do that to a remarkable kind of accuracy.
Really?
So yeah, you basically feed in lots of images of kind of cancers, and it can learn that's what a cancer looks like. That's just an abnormality.
Got it.
And it can do that really, really well and really quickly.
Gosh.
There was a study done in America this year where they were looking at specific antibiotics, because we know antibiotics are becoming less and less useful.
Yes.
And within an hour and a half, an AI model was able to analyse nearly 7,000 compounds.
Wow.
And kind of figure out which ones would work, which ones wouldn't work, was able to kind of tweak the designs of the different compounds to make them better.
What would, I mean, in ballpark terms, you may not know this, but what would that have been in man-hours?
Years, I would say.
Years, okay.
If you got to think about designing a new molecule, making a new molecule, testing a new molecule, it's able to do the brunt of that work in an hour or an hour and a half. In terms of the negatives for it, if you were to design a model to say make a chemical that can kill someone,
it's the corollary of what you just described, isn't it? Find me the most deadly poison ever.
Yeah, and if you can design it, you can make it very easily, and then
so that's where the bioterror threat comes from.
Yeah, and is a hospital going to have the facilities to find out what it is? If it's brand new, then they might not know how to treat it. They might not know what kind of treatments are best for it.
But you can't get ahead of that, can you? I don't see how governments could get ahead of that unless they're controlling the access to the technology, which they simply won't be able to do. Yeah,
exactly. And I think you've got the brilliance of it, but in the wrong hands, it could be disastrous.
Yeah, and that is, you've identified the problem, but you haven't given as much comfort that there is a way of addressing it. Or I keep using this phrase because I read it in the coverage this morning, getting ahead of the problem. I don't see what that would look like. So this is what Michelle Donnellan said, the Science and Technology Secretary. We need almost like a smoke alarm established so that not only are companies searching for, but have a response to the risk, and we know at what level they respond and how they respond. That doesn't fill me with confidence, Guy.
No, and I think there's a lot of vested interests that are going to mean that restrictions and legislation is going to be nigh and impossible. I think there's too many big companies that could make millions and billions out of use of AI in medicine that you're just not going to get the strong enough legislation to stop the bad people doing bad things.
No. Well, I mean, and if you did, it would have to be a level of international cooperation that this country in particular seems to be walking away from on various other fronts, whether it's on refugees or trade. The idea that we're better on our own. It couldn't be more ridiculous in the context of this. Actually, thank you, Guy. It's worth mentioning, given that Suella Braverman has successfully secured headlines with her latest bile about refugees. It's even by her standards, this is really, really stupid. So the idea, because the only way her current policies work is if we pretend that we are facing unique problems. So the idea that why are people coming here from France? France is a safe country is both stupid and dangerous logic, but it's quite attractive to the kind of people that fell for Brexit. But, I mean, how do you get to France? So where would every refugee have to stop if Suella Braverman's ideas were adopted by every country? They'd all be stopping at the Syrian border. Countries like Saudi Arabia already take far, far, far more refugees from other Middle Eastern countries than we ever will. But the whole logic, if you want to use that word, and frankly I don't really, but it's the nearest thing you can use to describe someone who dreams of planes full of genuine asylum seekers being flown to Rwanda for the rest of their life, appearing on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It only works if no one else is doing the same thing. If everybody adopted the idea that Suella Braverman is adopting, there'd be absolute carnage. Absolute carnage. The only way you cope with a refugee crisis is through international cooperation. putting pressure on the countries doing less than average to do more, and therefore allowing the countries doing more than average to have the freedom to do less, which, of course, if they're well run with an honest media, they wouldn't feel any particular need to do. So, I mean, the level of stupidity it takes to sort of say out loud what Suella Braverman is slated to say later today in America is truly breathtaking. Truly breathtaking. But if your brain's been boiled by bile regarding refugees, this is what happens. I mean, the point for me with her of no return would be when an actual Holocaust survivor stood up in her own constituency meeting and said, could you stop using this language? It's really reminiscent of how people spoke about my family in 1930s Germany. And Suella Braverman effectively told her to shut up and go away, to paraphrase Gavin Williamson. She sort of refused to take on board the criticism at all. So the reason why it's politically weird is that she can't yet say, we don't want anybody coming here ever. If she did, she'd hoover up the UKIP vote, but nobody else, and she'd alienate an awful lot of decent Tories, who do exist. So she can't say that out loud, but she has to keep talking. So it's just this constant dance between the unspeakable and the unsayable. And that's where she is. That's why she is where she is today. Farage said to the far right in Germany once, when he went out there to give a speech at the invitation of the granddaughter of a very senior Nazi, Farage actually said that you've got to start saying the unspeakable out loud. It was when he was sort of a little bit high on his own supply, politically speaking. He actually said it, but of course the British media ignored it. But that is part of the same problem that Braverman has at the moment. What she wants to say is nobody should ever come here from anywhere. We shouldn't be taking in any vulnerable people at all. But she can't. So she has to keep making these weird castles in the air that she's unveiling today. It'd be nice if the media had caught up with the fact that this is morally completely corrupt and devoid of any intellectual substance, but they can't because she's the Home Secretary. They have to report what she does and what she says because that's the model of the media, in the same way that the American media has to report what Donald Trump says and does because he is or was a president and is a former president. The idea that you can ignore people because they're idiots is cancelled out by the status of the job that they've inhabited, even if they're talking complete bilge. And if you want to see what happens when senior political journalists completely abnegate their responsibility to tell their viewers and their listeners that politicians are talking bilge, there's a documentary series unfolding on the BBC at the moment where their political editor somehow manages to detail chaos that she was covering at the time without ever mentioning to the watching public that it was chaos. So you spend 3 years tickling Boris Johnson's toes and then make a documentary series about how awful it all was when he was in charge. Absolutely extraordinary. That wasn't me, by the way. That was AI. 12:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation about AI is as illuminating as always, but it's different from a lot of the conversations that we have together because it is... Well, it's a developing reality, isn't it? And that means that no one can speak with certainty. No one can go definitive, to coin a mystery hour phrase. But I always find it very, very illuminating. 12:49 is the time. Lawrence is in Hastings. Lawrence, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hello.
Like a lot of people, I'm a long-time listener, and I felt like I'd call in on a topic that I feel is important enough.
Good man.
And I'd say I'm full tin hat when it comes to AI. And that I believe it is the most important conversation we can be having today.
That's not tin hat.
I think a lot of people overestimate just how dangerous it can be.
Sure.
And I'd like to take a crack at the existential threat angle of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in addition to the previous caller, it's not simply about just cyber warfare and chemical warfare. It's about the redistribution of power to regular people, because the extension of things like ChatGPT and having a personal AI, in your pocket on your computer, is that you have access to vast amounts of knowledge. And, as the previous caller said, these AI are finding out new things all the time. They're researching genomes. They're looking at protein folding. They're looking at all these different ways, we can find medicines. But it just lumped in with that. You don't even have to be looking for it. If you look at 7,000 genome sequences, you're going to find some new diseases. You're going to find some new ways to make weapons. And it just comes out in the wash of finding out all this useful, interesting stuff.
Yikes.
But ultimately what it means, because realistically, I think Oppenheimer was eye-opening for a lot of people if you've seen it, and you can see all the work and effort that went into creating the nuclear bomb.
Yes.
And obviously, it's very powerful and devastating. And at a time, and for the time being, it's controlled by governments, and it's highly regulated, and it's very, very hard to do. But there's no rule in nature or the universe that incredibly dangerous things are automatically hard to make.
No.
And when you or I or anyone has the ability, all access to all human knowledge, in our pocket, and in a population of, say, London or wherever, you get the occasional maniac, you get the occasional person who just wants to do ill. And with all the access to knowledge, it's very hard to prevent somebody, because what all AI does is it lowers the gap of, competence that you need to do these really incredible things, but also really incredibly dangerous things.
That's a very good way of putting it. It just takes the sweat out of it, doesn't it? Really, it takes the sweat and the brains and the hours and the graft, and it allows you to almost hack knowledge. And most obviously, in the context of existential threat, we're talking about the creation of bioweapons.
Yeah, and you see this, and you can see it because what a lot of people do, they look at the angle of jobs, and you see, there's a little bit of a threat now with software engineers, because stuff like ChatGPT can code. It can create code on its own. If I want to write a nice application in the afternoon, I can get ChatGPT to do that for me.
Yeah.
And it means, this once arcane bit of knowledge where, only software developers and engineers, and they have to do a lot of schooling and education, I can now do it. But in the same vein, I could write a virus if I wanted to. And, we look at it from a job perspective.
So that's cyber attacks. Sorry, that was the bit I got confused about, but you're absolutely right. So cyber attacks and biochemical attacks, you frightened the life out of me, to be honest, Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening, and this is what I mean. There isn't a way to sugarcoat it. And I'm, skeptical of our government, any government's ability to get ahead of it, because it is a new ballpark entirely. Like, you don't know what the threats are before they happen, with a large respect to a lot of these things. But the power of AI, and as I said before, it's discovering new knowledge all the time. Things that
and no one's going to be able to control it then.
It's one of those things where the likelihood is that you'd have to use AI to come up with ways to think about how to stop AI. But yeah, it's incredibly difficult, because once that power gets distributed, and it is to an extent, I use it in my day to day. I use it as a personal assistant at work. It helps me a lot. A lot of people I know do. But it
can I ask what you do?
Things.
What do you use it for? Do you mind me asking?
I work in projects for a vehicle company.
Okay.
Like, it's just like, it's really it helps with it helps come up with ideas sometimes.
Fair enough.
Which is quite helpful.
Let's start getting it to come up with topics for the show.
You could. Yeah, you absolutely can. But yeah,
first time for everything.
Exactly. So yeah, there's the angle, and yeah, I don't necessarily know that this is what Sunak is on about when he says,
I think it must be.
Not...
I think it must be. I mean, because you've explained it really clearly. So you could create. Yesterday, the government warned that AI could be used to create bioweapons, and that humans could lose control of the software. So I mean, you almost bring up Bond villain stuff, don't you? So because you would have governments that have agreed to abide by certain rules and guidelines, and quite strict rules in place on access and availability, but you get a Bond villain who rides roughshod over all of it in order to...
That's exactly right. And you have it's fine if we agree with America and China and whoever. Yes, we as a government won't do this, but any bad actor has the capability to do quite destructive things.
And what do I need in order to access all of it? How I mean, forgive me, this is quite a daft question, but I don't know the answer to it. Would I only need a smartphone, or would I need a very big computer?
At the minute, you would use a smartphone, but that's because they're on cloud services. They're using other people's processing. I'm using other people's software, but it's not beyond the wit of man to see that even in a couple of years, I could, perfectly affordable. Maybe I spend $10,000 on processing power, but
that's what you'd need in a few years' time. Okay, so I mean, in terms of getting ahead of it, what might that look like? Do you have any idea?
Getting ahead of it realistically, so you have things at the minute like ChatGPT, which are owned by organizations, but, the code is open source to an extent, so anyone can make their own. Restricting at the minute, these things have restrictors on what they are capable of doing. They have their own
built-in
it has its own parameters.
Built-in restrictors. So we need to be doing more on that. Thank you, Lawrence. I'm going to squeeze in one more call because Gareth works in cybersecurity. So and I'm already short of time, but that's the only reason. I just think it might sit neatly alongside what you've just told us. Gareth, over to you.
Yeah, hi, James. A lot of good sense spoken by your previous caller there, I think. A couple of points I was going to mention as well. I think we shouldn't be scared of AI, though. I think the areas that we should perhaps consider are what are the unique characteristics of AI. Ultimately, it's just a tool, isn't it? And it's how you use it, same as any other tool. But I think if we start getting into the space where we allow automated decisioning from AI, then perhaps that's a new frontier, isn't it? So what's the authority levels that we start to put around the controls? But in terms of cybersecurity, my sort of area, I think one of the areas of concern, I guess, and areas of interest is the ability to crack encryption. So if you can imagine, we rely on encryption for all secure communications over technology, whether that's buying something online or communicating on the battlefield, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, if you can crack that encryption, then that, of course, means that communications are open and you can understand all the implications.
As with what the last chat was telling us, it's about sucking the hard work out of it. So you wouldn't need Alan Turing and Bletchley Park. You could just have one person with a computer doing the same thing in a fraction of the time.
I think that's right. And also bear in mind, if you can record all encrypted traffic today and then you can replay that at some point in the future and decrypt it, then all of those communications, everything that's being said currently can be it can be exposed, and that has.
So right, in its simplest terms, the best thing society, media, politicians can do is talk about it a lot. Get it all out there and work with it, move forward. So in terms of getting in front of it, it's not an impossible dream, as you remind us. Don't be frightened. The more you know about it, the less easy you will be to spook, because there's always people benefiting from spooking you. And I don't want to be one of those people. If I say something that sounds spooky, it's because I'm spooked. It's not because I'm commoditizing your fear for my own personal advancement or profit, which leads us back to the anti-vaxxers, of course. Thank you, Gareth. That's it from me for another day. We will be doing it all again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. You can rewind live radio. You can enjoy the whole show podcast. You can find all of LBC's shows to catch up, and you can stay up to date with the latest news from LBC. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Free to download from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 Sheila Fogarty with